A bottle gets mixed exactly the way the internet says to. Same dose everyone uses, same gallon, same careful spray across every leaf. 3 weeks later, the edges of those leaves start curling, drying out like something burned them, even though nothing did. Nobody changed the watering. Nobody let disease in. The only thing that touched those leaves was the thing meant to help them. Spraying aspirin was never the mistake. Trusting that one number without question was. If you've already mixed up a bottle, or you're about to, this is for you. 3 things are coming up that almost nobody talks about. There's one number in the most common recipe floating around right now that's wrong, and it's wrong in a dangerous direction. There's a contradiction you might already be asking yourself. If the rule has always been to keep water off tomato leaves, why would anyone spray this exact mixture onto them? And there's a short list of things sitting in plenty of medicine cabinets right now, labeled exactly like ordinary aspirin, that should never go anywhere near this mix. The short answer isn't coming first. Hearing it without the reason behind it wouldn't actually change anything. A lot of people have followed that popular recipe to the letter, season after season, without ever knowing why the plant didn't respond the way they expected. It wasn't because they weren't careful. Nobody had pointed out exactly where the recipe went wrong. This isn't a miracle spray, and it's not as proven as some videos make it sound. But if a bottle's going in the hand anyway, one number decides whether it helps that plant or quietly damages it. 600 milligrams of aspirin per gallon of water is the number showing up in comment sections and video descriptions more than any other. People measure it out carefully. They follow it to the letter, convinced that doing it exactly right means the plant is safe. Nobody eyeballed it. Nobody rushed. Most people measured that number because they were trying to do the responsible thing, which is exactly what makes finding out it's wrong so frustrating. The problem was never whether aspirin works on tomato plants. The problem is the dose everyone agrees on is already on the wrong side of the line. There's a number that actually holds up, and it comes from real field trials, Noda comment section guess. At the University of Rhode Island, researchers tested aspirin sprays directly on tomato plants and found a real ceiling. Past 500 milligrams per gallon, the spray starts breaking down the waxy layer that protects the leaf surface. That layer is what keeps the leaf from losing water too fast. Once it's compromised, the edges dry out, curl inward, and start looking burned. Most people who see that assume disease has moved in. They reach for more spray more often, trying to fight off something that was never there to begin with. The actual working range sits between 250 and 500 milligrams per gallon. 600 isn't a small overshoot. It's already past the point where the leaf itself starts paying for it. Here's the good part. Fixing this doesn't mean throwing out the whole idea. The recipe itself wasn't wrong. One number in it was, drop it into the right range, and that curling, scorched edge from a minute ago has no reason to show up again. Same bottle, same spray bottle, same few minutes in the garden, just a different number on the way in. Quantity was never the only variable in this, though. There's a second rule a lot of people get backwards, and it has nothing to do with how much goes in the bottle. Keep the leaves dry. Water the soil, never the leaves. It's one of the first things anyone learns about growing tomatoes, repeated in nearly every gardening guide that exists. So why would this same recipe, the one asking for a careful dose and a careful gallon of water, also ask for that mixture to be sprayed directly onto the leaves? Not near them. Onto them, coating the exact surface every other piece of advice says to keep bone dry. Because the danger was never water touching the leaf. The danger was water staying there long enough for spores to wake up. The fungi behind leaf spot and early blight need a film of water sitting there for 4 to 6 hours straight before those spores can germinate at all. Rain does that easily, pooling thick in the joints where leaves meet stems, taking half a day to fully dry. A fine mist spread thin enough does something else entirely. It evaporates in a fraction of that time, gone before a spore has anywhere to take hold, especially right after sunrise, when the leaf's pores are wide open and the morning sun finishes the job in under an hour. Spraying onto the leaf was never the contradiction it looked like. The hour it happens in was doing all the work. Even at the right dose, evening still ruins it. Spray that same mixture after sunset, and the leaf doesn't get an hour to dry. It gets 10-12 hours of darkness and dropping temperature, holding that moisture in place all night long. That's not a minor scheduling mistake. That's building the exact conditions those fungi were waiting for, on purpose, with the one tool meant to help. Dose and timing were never the riskiest part of this, though. What's sitting in a lot of medicine cabinets right now is not every aspirin tablet behaves the same way once it hits water, and that difference matters more than the label suggests. Some tablets carry a coating designed to survive stomach acid, built to pass through a human digestive system before dissolving. Drop one of those into a cold glass of water, and it doesn't break down the way it's supposed to. Small fragments float instead, clogging the nozzle on a spray bottle, and any residue that does make it onto a leaf can settle directly over the pores the plant breathes through. A plant with its pores sealed shut isn't being protected. It's being suffocated by the same hand trying to help it. One tablet that looked exactly like every other aspirin tablet on the shelf. Coated or not, dose right, timing right, there's still one more way this goes wrong, and it's the one that does real damage. Picture the cabinet itself for a second. A box gets pulled out, extra strength printed across the front in the same red letters as every other aspirin box, and the only thing different is a small line further down that says caffeine, added to speed up the relief. Or a different box, the kind meant for headaches that won't quit, with acetaminophen mixed in instead, because that's what was left in the house. Nobody checks for that line. Why would they? It still says aspirin on the front. Inside a human body, both of those combinations are mild enough to sell without a prescription. Inside a tomato seedling, acetaminophen shuts down the leaf's ability to breathe, and caffeine stops the cells at the root tips and stem from dividing the way they're supposed to. The seedling doesn't wilt or show a burn. It just stalls, weeks later, stunted in a way nobody traces back to a box that looked exactly like the right one. Before going any further, there's a part most videos about this topic leave out entirely, and skipping it is how people end up trusting this more than they should. The University of Minnesota's Extension Office has reviewed the evidence behind homemade aspirin sprays for disease prevention and called it thin, not false. Thin. The closest thing to a real-world field trial, the one run at the University of Rhode Island, never actually proved the spray-controlled disease at all. Natural disease pressure that season was too low to show a measurable difference between treated and untreated plants. Anyone repeating that trial as proof of disease control is repeating a claim the trial itself never made. What does hold up is the mechanism underneath it. Salicylic acid is the plant's own internal alarm system, the signal it produces when something starts attacking it. Aspirin, once dissolved, breaks down into that same compound. That part of the biology is solid. Whether it reliably stops disease in an open garden, season after season, still isn't proven, which means the right move from here is treating this as a support tool, not a substitute for everything else already keeping that plant healthy. 4 numbers are all that separate a healthy leaf from that curling, scorched edge from earlier, the one that looked like disease and wasn't. 250 to 500 milligrams per gallon, never higher. Early morning, never evening. Every 2 weeks to start, stretch to 3 if the weathers run cooler or drier than usual. Plain aspirin, uncoated, nothing else mixed in, checked on the label before it touches the water. None of that guarantees the kind of harvest that gets people reaching for a spray bottle in the first place, branches bending under more fruit than the plant usually carries. What it guarantees is a plant that isn't fighting off damage from the thing meant to help it, which is the only part of this anyone can actually promise. Picture that same spray bottle sitting on the same counter the morning after all of this. There's no more standing there wondering if 600 is too much, or whether spraying the leaves was ever a mistake, or whether the bottle in the cabinet is even the right one. Each of those questions already has an answer now, and all 4 answers fit into the same few minutes outside, the same gallon, the same hands doing the same thing they were always going to do. What's gone is the guessing. That's the whole shift. None of that touches the other half of what's been quietly working against this plant all along. It's the way water reaches it in the first place. The same habit behind a tomato that splits open right before it ripens, and the same one behind the black, sunken spot that shows up at the bottom of a fruit that looked fine a week earlier, the spot almost everyone blames on a missing handful of calcium in the soil. The calcium was never missing. The watering pattern was locking it away.